Welcome to Picks with the Professor, the show where a real statistics professor and his friends give you sports betting tips. I'm your host, Professor Sides, and we are on day 2 of our 3-part season bets for the 2023 season. What else am I supposed to say? I don't know. Someone tell me something to say.
It's going to be good. Stick around. Watch the episode.
There you go. Jake, give me something good.
That's asking too much. I'm not that talented.
All right. So what we did in the first part of our 3-part series is we've got a little competition going. Each of my co-hosts gets $1,000 to make season-long bets. Minimum bet $50, maximum bet $250. I don't think anyone's going to hit that because if so, you're like really putting all your eggs in one basket. Maybe they will. And in part 3, who knows? TBD. But here is a quick little recap of where we are yesterday. So far, Cousin Jared has risked $350 of his dollars. Jake has risked $450 of his. So each of them have more than half of their bankroll to play with. Was there? I feel like there was something yesterday. Like I got like in the middle of the show. I was like, I should have mentioned this. Maybe it was this season, this competition. I don't know. We're still figuring out what the stakes are. Have we come up with any ideas? Yes. If you have any, drop it in the comments. Hit us up on Discord, whatever, maybe on Twitter. Let us know. We got to do something beyond the shaving the head thing. I feel like that's a tired thing. You know, we gotta do something more creative. Gentlemen, anything? Gentlemen, anything to say before we get into today's show?
I think let's just roll right into it.
Yeah, I'm in. I'll go ahead and apologize to all the Mountain West fans. I don't know anything about it.
We are going to cover the Mountain West at the end. We're going to cover the Pac-12. This is going to feel a little bit like a Pac-12 show, for better or worse. But we are going to start off in the Big Ten with Michigan, a team that, has played well the last couple of seasons, making it to the playoff. A wild game in last year's, for sure.
Yep.
I still feel like if I think back to that game, I'm still reeling as to how crazy that one was. We're going to start off here. Jake, this is yours, I believe. Under 10.5 wins at even money. The Big Ten is playing 9 conference games. So 3 non-conference games right there at the start of the season. All 3 of those look to be pretty gimmies. So you are banking on Michigan losing 2 of those. Obviously, Ohio State's going to be a tough game, even though it is at home. At Penn State's going to be tough. At Michigan State might be with the rivalry. You never know. Jake, what is the impetus for under 10.5 wins for Michigan?
I mean, they are a very good team. The defense is stout. But first off, we're not going to know anything about them until October because Nebraska's nothing. You have no clue what this team is doing. They, as good as the defense was, as physical as they are, they did not get many tackles for loss or like sacks. I mean, of the 73 they had last year, tackles for loss, 21 of them came against the mighty Indiana and Colorado State. And then they had one against Illinois and 3 against TCU in the playoffs. Like they're just not getting in the backfield. I don't see any adjustments that they made that were going to improve that. And their schedule is like as weak as the bottom part of the Big Ten is. The top part's fairly strong, and they're on the road at every tough opponent except for Ohio State, and that's a different level of tough anyway. But
it's a tough game no matter where you play.
I mean, even at Minnesota is tricky. You got at Michigan State with a rivalry. You got at Penn State, and then at Maryland. Maryland gave them everything they wanted last year and more. Who knows what happens if that game was at Maryland? Maybe that's a loss. And they don't even make the playoff. If they start making those kind of mistakes, I don't know. They should be able to control the game. They should be able to do this, but I think it's more than plausible that they drop one of those tough road games and probably Ohio State, or maybe 2 and beat Ohio State. Who knows? But I just don't see them coming through with 11 wins.
Even money is obviously nice here. And you're right, there's just a lot of landmines. Maryland at home gives some teams all they want. Like you said, they play some real. They completely disappear. There's been teams who've just destroyed Maryland, but Maryland has been kind of frisky. Minnesota the same way with that style of play. Of course, can beat anybody at home. It seems like, and Penn State, I think we all expect to be really good. I have 2 main questions about the Big Ten that I'm going to ask here because I think it kind of is relevant here. Number one, what is Michigan's offense going to be like? Because last year we saw them take a huge step forward, the step forward that we've been waiting for them to take for years now. I don't even know how many years. I'd be wrong if I guessed.
Ever since Harbaugh's been there.
Yeah. And probably before, to be honest.
Yeah.
Because the times weren't great before that. But I mean, can they build off that? Can they keep up that, or is it going to revert back to what we saw before? Question number two, is Penn State finally going to make the leap? Because they have been on that second tier for quite a while now, really far behind Ohio State and Michigan, a really good team, but Ohio State and Michigan have just been far ahead of them. Can Penn State finally make that leap? You might say no, but of course we also thought Michigan's offense would never make that leap either, so you never know what's going to happen. Because Jared, I feel like I've given you a million different talking points. Where does your head go with this Michigan discussion?
Well, okay. So first of all, just what you just said about Penn State. The problem is, and I think that the college football model sideline that you have here does a really good job of illustrating this. The problem is there's usually the top, 3, 4, 5 teams, and then there's a clear gap down to the rest. And I think that Penn State, unfortunately, finds itself in the scenario where Ohio State and Michigan are two of the teams that are in those top 3, 4, 5. And Penn State could be better, but I think it's still going to be a gap down to them, even if they were, the 7th best team in college football or something like that. And it's weird how college football works like that, how there always just seems to be this upper crust of teams that kind of really separates itself from the rest. So I think Penn State's going to be good this year, but I don't know if it makes a difference when you're comparing yourselves to those two really good teams. The only other thing I would say about Michigan actually isn't about Michigan. It's about Ohio State. And I know a lot of Ohio State fans are getting, antsy about Ryan Day seemingly unable to beat Jim Harbaugh. But what I would say, the person that you can actually look to for that, and the school that you can look to as a model for, hey, you need to stick with your coach even when they can't win a big game, is Jim Harbaugh in Michigan.
Yeah.
Because if they would have let him go for not being able to beat Ohio State, they definitely
would have missed out on these last 2 years.
Yeah, they would have missed out on these last 2 years. So Ohio State fans, I know, easier said than done, for sure. But you're a very, very good team. You're going to beat Michigan. Again, don't get too carried away. Because if Michigan had gotten carried away, they wouldn't have beaten you the past 2 years.
Yes, and that's a great point that at least for now, Penn State is where Michigan was for so many years up until these last 2 years.
Yep.
Very good, but could not get over the hump, could not get in that upper tier. And these last 2 years, they've made that leap, really made the leap 2 years ago. And then last year really solidified it, ranking really strong, a fantastic team. And then things just went haywire for them in the playoff. But that's sports, 1 game playoffs. You never really know what's going to happen with that. So Michigan under 10.5 wins, even money. Jake, this one is $50 for you, correct?
Yeah. And on that Penn State, I think when they go divisionless, that'll help them out because getting there once is it opens a door, and then all of a sudden you're on TV and you get better recruits and you're able to do that. So maybe one of these divisionless years they'll not have both Ohio State and Penn State, and it'll just kind of open the door for them.
Yeah, absolutely. Next pick here, because of Jared, Purdue over 5.5 wins. You're laying some juice here, minus 155. Fresno State, Virginia Tech, Syracuse are your 3 non-conference games. Fresno State taking a step back last year, so that's probably a win. At Virginia Tech, that could be tricky. You never really know. Tough place to play. Virginia Tech's taking a step back, though. Syracuse at home, much better than Syracuse on the road, and then you get into the conference slate. Tell us why you're on over 5.5.
Well, let's work on getting this banner updated because I'm going under 5.5 wins.
Close enough.
Yeah, close enough. It's all the same, but who's counting? So the reason that I'm going under 5.5 wins with Purdue.
There we go. It's fixed for you there. Are you happy?
There we go. Under 5.5 wins. So what I would say here is I feel like with Braum leaving, he had a very strong cultural identity on offense. And ironically, I think Purdue is set up really well for the future, bringing in Ryan Walter as the head coach, bringing in Graham Harrell as the offensive coordinator, which for all of the issues that West Virginia had last year, Graham Harrell's offense was pretty good at times for what he had to work with, in my opinion. So I think long-term Purdue is set up for success, but I think there's going to be a real culture change that has to take place. Hudson Card could be a very good quarterback for a solid, especially Big Ten West quarterback this year, I think. But I think there's just going to be
the bar's low.
Yeah, the bar is low, but I think there's just going to be some growing pains. And unfortunately, when you look at this schedule, I don't think that sets up well for growing pains. I mean, honestly, the first half of this schedule, Fresno State, no gimme the first game. Obviously, Fresno State's going to probably be taking a step back without Jake Haener this year. But I think you would be remiss if you just said that, Fresno State's going to be an easy game, that first game of the season. I think that's going to be a tough matchup.
I will say if it's a lot scarier if it's on the road, that's for sure, because that's one that these type of teams traveling out West Coast lose way more than they should. At home, they should at least be favored. And Fresno State looked decent without Haener last year. They looked really terrible at first, and then they kind of got rolling a little bit without him, and then he came back, and of course, he was so good. So, but taking a step back, but you never know in that first game, of course.
It's going to be a tougher game, I think. And then Virginia Tech, which Virginia Tech has been down for sure. But I think in Brett Pry's second season, they're going to make some strides. And it bothers me playing at Virginia Tech so early in the season. Again, if this were a game that were at home, I'd be less concerned about it. But going on the road to Virginia Tech, a little bit concerned about that. And then you've got Syracuse, which – I think you should probably win that game and get a revenge spot after Syracuse beat them last year. But, man, then you roll into Wisconsin, Illinois, Iowa, and Ohio State all in a row without a bye. That is just a gauntlet for any team, much less one that's bring in a new offensive coordinator, new head coach, and, again, kind of moving away from that identity that they had with Purdue. And then you've got a bye week, and you've got Nebraska, which who knows what you're going to get with Nebraska at that point in the season. You would think an improving Nebraska at that point. But then you've got to go to Michigan, and that's not going to be an easy game at all. So I think maybe you could find yourself in a situation where they could win the last 3 games of the season, Minnesota, Northwestern, Indiana, and maybe that's how you lose this play. But I think that there are just some landmines early in the season, some tough stretches, and potentially, the fact for maybe packing it in at the end after you get that, Iowa, Ohio State, Michigan, 3 out of 5 weeks, and then, what do you have to play for? Minnesota in November is not going to be you're not going to be able to just run through them either because, it's the Big Ten West. It's going to be cold, might have an ugly game. So I just think there's a lot of landmines in this schedule, and I think under 5.5, even at the juiced odds here at minus 155 is a good value. And so I'm putting $50 on this play.
If we use my end of season ratings for last year, so not having gone through and doing returning production and transfers and recruiting classes, all that nonsense, I would have had Purdue as about a 9-point home favorite to Syracuse in that game, which is not that much. I mean, that's a very losable game. But like I said, I think there's a lot of those landmines, a lot of coin toss game, a lot of games that'll be single-digit spreads. Versus Wisconsin, versus Illinois, at Iowa, potentially at Nebraska versus Minnesota, and even at Northwestern. All of us have a potential to be single-digit spreads, and that creates a lot of tough spots for them and not a ton of gimmies. I think that Virginia Tech game is going to be really huge for this one because, like we talked about right there, definitely take a step back, but it's a really tough place to play. Yep. It will be an early start, so it won't be quite as daunting as the night games there, which get crazy, but still, I assume will be a good crowd early in the season. Virginia Tech, their fans will be, there and happy and not out of it, right, when you get to the end of the season. So it should be one that could make or break. That one in the Syracuse, those second and third games that could really make or break that one. Then one more Big Ten one. Back to you, Jake. Michigan State under 5.5 wins. I have to say, unders are probably the smarter wager for season bets because people love over, so they tend to be a little overpriced, no pun intended, and under should have the value. Someone has to win some Big Ten games, guys. I mean, how are we got 3 unders here? Jake, sell us on this under. I mean, you got 2 gimmies at the start of the season with Central Michigan and Richmond. The home game against Washington, hopefully that'll be more interesting than last year's game, and then of course the conference slate. Why are you on the under here at plus odds?
First off, I really wish I could be Mel Tucker's agent, that he can go in one good year, fleece Michigan State for however much ever he got paid of that $100 million deal, and then not worry about it.
Yeah. Look, nobody should be pointing fingers at bad college football head coaching contracts, guys. I mean, let's just not talk about that.
You gotta poke it when it's fun. But yeah, you got the 2 gimmies there, and then Indiana. Where are you coming up with the 3 other wins? I couldn't find it.
Nebraska.
I mean, that's maybe. I'm not that confident in it.
Maybe home against Maryland. Maybe at Rutgers. It's tough.
You've got Peyton Thorne. He's gone. Their top wide receivers are gone. The defense could take a giant leap forward and still be below average. And I mean, that's
those receivers also. I don't think you can understate just how good those receivers were in helping that offense.
Yeah, I mean, like I said, I only see the 2 for sure wins. You definitely have 3 for sure losses with Penn State, Ohio State, and Michigan. I'd throw Washington and Iowa in there. I had Iowa and Washington at home because Washington's going to be a pretty good team. I just really see a struggle to find 4 wins if you're 2-5 with those games on that. So I think under, and I don't see it getting much better because the defense is just this guy was supposed to be Tucker was supposed to be a great defensive coach, especially secondary, and it's been nothing but terrible outside 1 year. And I don't know how on earth they're going to get to a bowl game this year.
I guess at least you, Jake, are the one throwing stones at the bad coaching contract and not Cousin Jerry. Because I guess then at that point, if he were to do it, we could say, hey,
Tennessee's got plenty.
Or what? Oh, that's true. That's true. Cousin Jerry, any comment on Michigan State here?
I can't believe that you're getting plus 130 here on the under 5.5. This definitely seems like the way I would lean. I mean, how can you pass up that type of value? I would also say, I don't know if Central Michigan is going to be as much as a give me as people think. Certainly, I think Michigan State's going to win that game. But the first game last season, Central Michigan lost to Oklahoma State 58-44. That Oklahoma State team a little bit different offensively at the beginning of the season than they were at the end of the season. But if they go in there and put up 35 points against Michigan State, do we think that Michigan State is going to be able to get in a track meet with Central Michigan with all the talent that they've lost on offense? And then, Central Michigan lost a game to Penn State last year, which Penn State I think is much better than Michigan State is. They lost that game by about 17 points. So anyway, where I'm going with this, I think Central Michigan can even give them a game that first week of the season. So yeah, I like this play. I think the plus 130 definitely makes this the way to go if you're going to play this one.
I have zero idea if Central Michigan is supposed to be any better this year or not. We'll talk about that when we get to the group of 5 schools with the MAC on our next show. But I would have this at Michigan State minus 17 using last year's rosters. But with knowing that Michigan State lost some things, you have to assume that number would drop, assuming Central Michigan is about the same. So, not a complete, give me. And one, you can't look ahead on a Friday night spot. Sometimes things get weird, of course. If Central Michigan pulls the upset, Jake, I think we can go ahead and you can just take this one to the bank if that were to happen. Gentlemen, any last words on the Big Ten before we move on to the Pac-12?
I just think that the Big Ten is going to be the same Big Ten that it's been the past few years, which is Michigan, Ohio State, Penn State, and then just kind of chaos below that, unless, and I don't want to steal Jake's thunder if this is what he's going to say, but Wisconsin. What is the heck is Wisconsin going to look like this year? Putting in a spread offense, I think it's going to be very, very fun to watch what Wisconsin turns into this year.
That's exactly where I was going. I was thinking Wisconsin is just a giant question mark because I looked at them and I couldn't find a play on that. So I'm excited to see what they do. They were the only team out west I think could even stand a chance of dethroning somebody in the Big Ten championship. But who knows?
All right, shifting to the Pac-12. You cannot talk about the Pac-12 without talking about Deion Sanders in Colorado. They start off with TCU. Last year, we took the points with Colorado last year, and it looked great in the first half, and I went to bed, and then the rest of the game happened. And the first half of that game was definitely Colorado's high point of the season, and the second half was basically a foreshadowing of everything else to come. This is a brutal schedule for Deion here in year one, getting a rival in Nebraska as a non-conference game at TCU, and then the in-state rival in Colorado State. They should be favored in that game, of course, but in a rivalry game, you never really know. Brutal schedule. But the Pac-12 has always got a lot of question marks in it. Jake, you think over 3.5 wins, even at minus 160. Tell us why.
I mean, I'm not sure if Deion is good or bad yet. Like as a coach, it seems good. But what he brought with him is big. Bringing in his son as a QB, that's a huge upgrade there. The Sean Lewis hire at Mac from Kent State, I think it's going to be brilliant. I think it's really going to help mask some issues they have with the speed and everything. it's going to be fun. They brought in some great receivers with Horn and Weaver. The defense should take a big step up. Offensive line, it's a big question mark, but Sanders is very mobile. So I think talent-wise, they're going to be there. Defense is, I think they'll be a lot better because that seems where Dion feels a lot better. Plus, the secondary it's going to be real hard to throw on them with the recruits they brought in, and then the guy from last year, the number one guy, I forget his name. I think they're going to be a little bit better than what most people think. I think you're going to get Colorado State, probably Nebraska, and then having Arizona State, Stanford, and Arizona on the schedule is a blessing there because those are all three pretty rough teams that I don't see a lot of talent there. And then you've got two of those are at home. If you can get Nebraska and Colorado State, I think you're home free on this. And then who knows, they may sneak around and steal one from like Washington State or on the road. Maybe Utah if Utah stinks.
I'm gonna say no to both of those. They're both losses in my book.
Yeah. I'm just trying to point where the possibility is because it's not USC or Oregon.
No,
I don't think it'll be UCLA.
No,
those are the only two other.
Yeah, you have to have it before the last game. But I mean, you do home against Nebraska, home against Colorado State, at Arizona State versus Stanford versus Arizona. That's 5 very winnable games, 4 of which are at home. And so that's your hope there is they take care of business in those games. They're just going to win 4 of the 5, 4 of them are at home, and they're all winnable. Because of Jared, are you going to say it or am I going to say it? Because I feel like there obviously are more question marks with Colorado than any other team, maybe in the history of college football that we've ever been paying attention, right?
Yeah, no. I mean, they had like 60 players transfer out or something like that, some ridiculous number.
Records are broken.
But is that bad? When you were as bad as they were, isn't that a good thing?
Well, I think
I don't know.
Yeah, I'm not sure that it's bad, but what I would say is I would be concerned about depth, which I mean, obviously, again, when you're that bad, how much depth do you really have?
Probably don't have depth anyway.
Yeah. But literally, I don't know this for sure, but like at some positions, I'm sure it's like they get 2 injuries. Like, do they have somebody that can actually go out and play the position that is actually built to play the position? Okay, here's the thing. I think the bottom of the Pac-12 is going to be not good. And can I, in good conscience, recommend that you play over 3.5 wins for Colorado? In my opinion, no. But also, can I, in good conscience, tell you to play under 3.5 wins with Colorado? No. Because there are some bad teams on this schedule. I think Stanford's going to be bad. It's going to be a rough year for Arizona State. So I just think that they could come across 4 wins, and it would not surprise me. But I cannot, in good conscience, recommend one way or another on this team. But there is one team at the bottom of the Pac-12 that I do think I can recommend to play on, and we'll talk about that a little later.
All right, little teaser for later in the show. That's not where we're going next, though. We are going to the top of the Pac-12. The other team that, if you were talking about the Pac-12, you kind of have to talk about USC. Because, Jared, you're on the over 10 wins. Of all the teams at the end of the season, and we kind of saw this coming. I think we talked about it, right? The way that team came together with all the transfers, kind of similar to Colorado this year. Colorado's taking it to a whole new level, but this is what happened with Lincoln Riley last year. A bunch of transfers, higher profile guys, of course, and we knew there was a lot of talent, but took a little bit of time to kind of gel. But by the end of the season, they were playing some really good football, did have some depth issues themselves. This year in year 2, seemingly have all those things fixed. Everything should click. We talked about the Big 12 yesterday, and we do expect Oklahoma to bounce back, but you do have to wonder how much of Oklahoma's success was Lincoln Riley. And of course, before that, Stoops being a fantastic coach. How much were those 2 coaches, now Lincoln Riley at USC? We saw him do things that a USC fan out there might be able to correct me on this, but it feels like did things at USC last year that we haven't seen since Pete Carroll. Was a really promising year. You have to be excited if you're a USC fan. Jared, you're buying into the hype here. Tell us why.
Yeah, I'm betting 100 on the over 10 wins. So I want to pose a couple of questions to both of you. Does this USC team essentially feel like every other Oklahoma team that Lincoln Riley had?
Yeah.
Okay. Does the Pac-12 at this moment feel very similar to the Big 12 that Lincoln Riley was coaching in? And, looking at Oregon, Washington, UCLA, Utah, got Notre Dame on the schedule, it feels pretty Big 12-y to me.
Yeah. I think the difference would be, I think there's a little bit more of a split in that I think the upper middle of the Pac-12 might be a little bit stronger, but the bottom of the Pac-12 is a little bit weaker. You have more gimme wins than the Big 12 ever had, but there's a little bit of solid teams at the top. And of course, they do throw Notre Dame in, which is the other big asterisk.
Yeah. And so then my final question to you two would be, in seasons where Oklahoma played a full schedule, how many of those seasons did Lincoln Riley not win 10 games?
I'm assuming he did it every year.
Yes, he did it. He did it every year. He has won at least 10 games every year that he has coached at least a full schedule. 2020, they only won 9 games, but of course they didn't play the full schedule in 2020. So this just feels like every other Lincoln Riley team, which is basically a guaranteed 10 wins with an amazing quarterback. I even have to say I might be a little bit higher on USC than most because I do think they got in some defensive transfers that can help them out. I feel like that's what we say every year about a Lincoln Riley coach team, that this is going to be the year the defense plays better. But I think they have the best chance to have a decent defense that they've had ever since Riley's been a head coach, in my opinion. So, yeah, this is one of those, it just feels lather, rinse, repeat. I don't know why we wouldn't expect the same thing that we've seen every single season from Lincoln Riley with a great quarterback, and this year that being Caleb Williams.
So we are going to talk about Utah, but I would be remiss if I didn't point out that, Utah – last year played a style of football that was very different than what we had seen in previous seasons from Utah. We had previously seen grinded out, pounded out, defensive-minded, gritty football from Utah. Last year, we saw a Utah team that wasn't as good defensively, but really fantastic on offense, led by a couple of NFL caliber tight ends and a quarterback playing really well. Utah was able to handle USC last year, a couple different various reasons why, so we don't have to dive into all that, but they at least played them really well at minimum. Mm-hmm. You can't even argue whatever asterisk you want to give, you can't argue that point. Yeah. I think it's interesting. You go the other end of the spectrum. Lincoln Riley's Oklahoma teams had a ton of problems with the Baylor teams when they were good defensively, so it makes you wonder if USC is going to struggle with a team that can do really well on one side or the other, and if you can't super excel on one side of the ball or the other, they're going to roll you. That's kind of how I feel about this USC team personally. Is if you're good on offense and good on defense, they're going to beat you. If you can be excellent on one of the two, you have a chance.
Yeah,
and so
and ironically, the team that, and not just because of what happened last season, but the team that would worry me the most if I were USC in the Pac-12, I think, is Oregon State, which they get to avoid just because of the type of game that Oregon State can play. But
they really should have lost.
They had that game. Oregon State had that game.
Yeah, but I look at the tough Pac-12 games they've got, and you're like, okay, Washington, that's going to be a shootout. Give me Lincoln Riley and Caleb Williams. Oregon's probably going to be a shootout. Give me Lincoln Riley and Caleb Williams. Utah, I don't know. Utah can definitely win that game, but after what I saw last season, I think that's going to be a shootout. Give me Lincoln Riley and Caleb Williams. So I don't know. I just feel like the schedule sets up well in the tough games. I feel like it's going to be a style of game that's going to be in USC's wheelhouse.
It's going to be obviously a cakewalk to 6-0. I don't see any problems getting there. I mean, that's ridiculously easy for those first 6. The back 6 games, obviously you have California is going to be a gimme, but the other 5 games, I don't think they're going to lose all 5 of those. But I mean, those are tougher. Notre Dame, you never really know what to expect from them. I don't think that's going to be that challenging of a game. I think the road aspect is going to be the hardest part of that. But I think they should be able to handle that one. Utah, again, last year gave them trouble. The Washington one at home helps. UCLA at home helps. The road game at Oregon, that's a tough one. That's probably going to be the game that they are the favored by the least in, and or potentially, if Oregon's as good as we think, maybe just straight up underdogs in that game. Last year was the first year in the Pac-12 that I thought was really fun because of the fact that there were like 4 teams at the top that were really good instead of just like 2. Washington was trying to sneak up into that. Oregon State was trying to sneak up into that. And of course you had Oregon and USC as well. UCLA was trying to sneak up into that. And of course Utah. I mean, you had some really talented at the top, made it a lot of fun. And I feel like that's what I see when I see the back half of this schedule. Jake, do you have anything to talk about with USC, or does that just segue us right into your next pick?
I mean, you kind of hit all my points. I mean, I think if you get by Notre Dame, you've cashed this one because your other tough games are at home and then at Oregon. Like at Oregon is if you get by Notre Dame, that's the only one I see really being a loss, and so you've cashed it at that point.
Or at least you've guaranteed a push, worst case at that point.
Yeah.
It would be really hard to lose the wager there. Speaking of Oregon, Jake, you are on Oregon's under 9.5. Portland State, obviously that's a gimme. Hawaii, that's a gimme. At Tech, that one, like, sneaky could be a fun game at Tech. Always have to talk about these non-conference games because we get some really good ones early on, and then of course the conference grind. A couple of easy ones to start off with, Colorado and Stanford, and then gets a little bit tougher for them. Jake, you're seeing at least 3 losses here. Tell us more.
Yeah, I think the offensive line is where the biggest issue is here, right? They are in a lot of trouble there. And then I think it's really both lines. Their skill positions are so good, but the offensive line is going to take a step back. That means more running for Bo Nix. And we saw what happened in the Oregon State game when Bo Nix got hurt and tried to play through it. I mean, it's so weird to be talking about a Bo Nix led team and thinking 2 good years in a row. Years instead of games. Like, it was hard to find 2 good games in a row in the SEC. But he was incredible last year and deserves every bit of all the hype he's getting this year. I just don't see the offensive line being good enough to hold up all the time. I don't see him having it put together in the second week because at Lubbock is tough. That is going to be a fun game to watch. But I think that game ends up being a loss, and then fighting the rest of that schedule is tough. The schedule's not great. I think 9 wins is where this team sits, and so getting that 10th win is going to be tough because, you've got USC on there, and even though it's at home, USC is a very good team. You've got Oregon State at home, but Oregon State could be very sneaky good. At Washington
last year, they gave them all sorts of trouble last year.
And then at Utah is always tough, no matter how good Utah is or not. It's a tough back end of the schedule, and I think that's week 2 is really what hampers them from being able to get to that 10th win.
Yeah, if they win at Tech, you're not doomed. If they lose, you've probably got this one in the bag. Just getting past that, at Washington is going to be somewhere around a coin toss game. Who knows exactly what the number will be, but it'll be pretty close to 50-50. At Utah will be pretty close to 50-50. Home against USC, pretty close to 50-50. That's 3 coin toss games right there in the back half of the season. And then, of course, Oregon State could, they'll be favored in that one at home. But like we said, that could give them trouble. And Oregon State, I think, is a fun team to think about just because they play such a different style of football. And they could really cause a lot of problems for teams in the Pac-12. Cousin Jared, Bo Nix, you were very familiar with Bo Nix.
Yeah.
I can't. Are we? Did he make the leap? Is that real? How much of that was the teammates? How much of that was the scheme? What are we thinking about this? Because it was such an interesting point of conversation last year. Coming into the season, we really expected, the same roller coaster we always had, and we didn't really get it until he got hurt, and that wasn't his fault at that point.
Yeah.
Of course, that is a big question. Can he stay healthy?
Yeah.
Given the style of football he plays.
Yeah, so I think you hit on it perfectly. If he can stay healthy, I think he's going to have a good season. And so I think that's the number one thing you have to look at. The other thing that I would say, and this is a non-answer, but looking at the schedule, do you feel like you're going to know what Bo Nix is based off of this schedule? Because when you look at it, who is going to slow down Bo Nix? Is it maybe you can convince me Washington State could. You can convince me Utah could. And you could convince me Oregon State could. I don't see any other team on this schedule that really, gives me any concern if I'm an Oregon fan as far as slowing them down offensively. Now, could they get into a shootout, lose a game with like Washington or USC or whatever? Of course they could. But I just think that if he stays healthy, there's not many talented defenses on this schedule that are going to give him very many problems.
Yeah.
The more I look at it, the Arizona State game is a trap game if I've ever seen it.
Oh, yeah.
And nothing bad has ever happened to good Oregon teams traveling to Arizona in the second half of years.
Yeah.
Ever.
Never, not once.
No. No, we haven't talked about trap games yet, but absolutely. That is one. Even the home game against California is not that California would be good enough to win, but I mean, it's another. I mean, this is sandwiched here, really, with Washington State as well. I mean, you've got at Washington, at Utah are big circle spots. You got home against Washington State sandwich. You got Utah, USC, California sandwich. You got USC, Oregon State, Arizona State sandwich. They're going to have to figure out how to stay focused, coming off of a big game and heading into a big game. For sure. Of those, obviously, the road game is the one that you can blow because the Pac-12, especially Pac-12 after dark, there are random teams that lose these road games. Home games less so. Not impossible. It's happened, but who knows at that point if Arizona State, I assume they've got a lot of transfers as well after what happened last year. Maybe by that point of the season, they're playing relatively well and can at least make that one interesting. Back over to you, Cousin Jared. Cal under 5.5 wins. Honestly, week 1 in my backyard here in Denton, Texas, at North Texas, feels like that could really set the tone for this if they lose that game, and that should be a pretty coin tossy type game right there as well. Yeah. If they lose that game, probably not going to beat Auburn. That could set things downward quickly. Are we going to talk about the coaching situation, or have we moved on from that?
No, I don't know why Justin Wilcox passed on the Oregon job. I mean, I'm never going to let him down on this. What? Like, there's no logical reason. Anyway, so Cal, I kind of mentioned this when Jake talked about Colorado. I think the bottom of the Pac-12 is going to be pretty bad this year. And certainly there are going to be some teams that luck into 4 or 5 wins. The thing about Cal is that their total is set at 5.5. So they could luck into 5 wins and I still win this bet. Yes, I'm having to lay a little bit of juice here, but I still think it's too much value to pass up. I'm betting $100 on this. So I'll look at the schedule. Okay, let's say they beat North Texas, they beat Idaho. Are they going to beat Arizona State? Are they going to beat Stanford? Okay, but then
that's only 4 wins.
That's only 4 wins. I don't think they're beating UCLA, Oregon, USC, Utah, Oregon State, Washington, Auburn. It's just there seem to be a bunch of games where they just don't have a chance, and they would have to be absolutely perfect in the games they can win, and they would have to pull an upset or 2 somewhere else. And I feel like we've seen for the past couple of years, that's just not who Cal is under Justin Wilcox. The first few years, they had some sparks, but since then it's just kind of been the same, and it's 3, 4, 5 wins every season. So I don't know why that would change, even with how bad the bottom of the Pac-12 is.
I think your hope, if you're a Cal fan, because this line is set up bowl eligibility, your hope to get to a bowl game, get those extra weeks of practice, the on-screen time, right, recruiting benefit, all that stuff, right? We all know how big that is in college football. Your hope is that they can regain the defensive prowess that they had in years past, and they can win a game or 2 because they play a grinded out. They make teams that are more skilled than them. They drag them through the mud, play ugly games, and they can win a 13-10, 13-12, I don't know, type game. Jake, do you see any way that they can do that?
I think this is a terrible conference to try to get back your defensive prowess because you've got some very high-powered offenses with teams that don't have great defenses. Like Washington is with Penix Jr. That is tough to stop for really good defenses, let alone one trying to find its feet. USC with Caleb Williams. I mean, I don't know that there's a defense out there that can just, hey, we stopped Caleb. That doesn't happen. Bo Nix in Oregon.
And we haven't even talked about UCLA. This whole show is all back to what we got. Yeah. But UCLA's not a bad team either, and pretty decent offense themselves.
And so it's like, where do you get your feet? Where do you breathe after Idaho? You really can't. Because you have to win Arizona State at home. You're not going to get Oregon State. Then you have to go to Utah, USC, at Oregon. I don't see where you catch a breath if you're a weaker team there.
Yeah, this one might be my favorite bet of at least what I've heard so far from y'all. Just because the fact that if I give at North Texas, which I'm not sure they're going to get, Idaho, home against Arizona State, don't know if they're going to get it, but sure, we'll give it to them. Home against Washington State, don't know if they're going to get it, but sure, we'll give it to them. And at Stanford, that's 5 wins, and I cannot figure out the 6th win. Home against Auburn, maybe? home against Oregon State
with big game Hugh Freeze and new quarterback Peyton Thorne. I don't see that. I don't see them winning that game. Maybe I'm wrong.
I mean, the hope there is the travel gets to them, right? It's that sort of thing. But yeah, I mean, it's going to be really tough to get to 6 on this one. So yeah, I'm gonna, like I said, this might be the favorite of the ones that we have talked about here so far. Sticking in the Pac-12 because we do love the Pac-12 here. We do love late night football because what else is there to do late night on a Saturday? Oregon State over 8.5 wins, around even money. Back to you for this one, Jake. And all I will say before I turn over to you is I found myself rooting for Oregon State so much last year. I loved the style that was different of football in that conference. I loved rooting for what seemed like an underdog. They almost had the USC game. They pulled it off against Oregon. I mean, it was just a fun team to root for. I don't know how many people felt that way because it was a different style of fun. It wasn't the up tempo scoring fun that most people like, but I loved rooting for them. It looks like based off of this, you think I'm going to be rooting for them a lot again this season.
Yeah, I really think Jonathan Smith might be a legit, very good coach. He's got a really hard QB competition coming in because I still think DJ's got talent, and obviously Gilbertson was good last year. But whoever wins that battle has got tons of help, right? You've got an offensive line that's one of the best in college football, and that returns 4 starters. You've got absolute stud and Damian Martinez, but who was rookie of the year in the Pac-12 and had a ton of talent right behind him that they combined for 2,000 yards and 18 scores. So, I mean, it takes a lot of pressure off whoever is the quarterback. Defense might take a little step back, but I still think there's enough talent there to get right back to it, keep it at the same level. I mean, it's turnovers for this team, right? They were 10-1 last year when they didn't turn the ball over 4 times. The USC game that they had them beat in was 4 interceptions that turned it around. I think we're going to get a much better version of this Oregon State team because, one, you don't see USC on the schedule. I mean, you've got probably 3 to 4 wins there right off the bat, and then California and Stanford and Colorado and Arizona on there. We're looking at, 7 wins, so you just have to find one with Washington at home, Utah at home, UCLA at home, and then at Oregon. You just have to get one of those.
I mean, the Oregon game's obviously going to be really tough. At Washington State might be a little bit tough just because road game up there, Yeah. But yeah, a lot the 3 of the really good teams coming to Corvallis definitely sets up where they could have a big season.
Yeah, I think there's a decent opportunity to put some money on them to win the Pac-12 because, I mean, if they get there, then it's a 1-game match with probably USC, who they had their number last year until they just started handing them the ball. So I don't know. I mean, that would be a flyer pick, but who else likes to spoil teams?
Yeah, Jake, you nailed some of your long shots in the college basketball tournament, conference tournament discussion. Personally, I would not put anything on Oregon State to win the conference simply because it being the top 2 teams in the Pac-12, I have zero idea who's going to play for it, and it's going to be chaos. So the odds would reflect that you'd get massive plus odds on this pick, which you would need to get, but it's going to be such a fun top-heavy race that I have zero idea. And before with the divisions, you could at least kind of map it out. This team plays this team, and these 3 are in here, and so you kind of figure some of that out a little bit better. Kind of say, this matchup. Oh, well, this team gets this team, and so you now it's like, who knows? And it may end up with wild tiebreakers too.
Yeah, you can see I wasn't confident enough to put it on here. I was just saying, if you've got a few extra dollars, why not?
Fair. I will say, I do think. So we talked about the USC game. I do want to point out, Oregon State got a little lucky playing USC early on before they had really settled in. I think, however, they got really unlucky because I don't think Oregon State knew at that point, none of us knew, that USC's defensive game plan was cause turnovers because we can't actually stop anybody.
Yeah,
we learned that, but we didn't know that at the time. And I think if Oregon State knew that, I think they would have had a slightly different offensive game plan and would not have thrown as many interceptions because they would have known that's all USC is trying to do. And you got to play it safe and grind it out. And we saw Notre Dame at the end of the season do that. Notre Dame's offense was terrible and just marched it up and down the field on USC for the most part, more than they have against most teams because they would have known that's all USC is trying to do. And you got to play it safe and grind it out. And we saw Notre Dame at the end of the season do that. Notre Dame's offense was terrible and just marched it up and down the field on USC for the most part, more than they have against most teams because they knew what to avoid with USC, and Oregon State did not know that. And so I do wonder if whatever magic Oregon State threw at them defensively that threw off Lincoln Riley and his well-oiled machine, if they do happen to meet in the conference championship game, if that would still work again or not. And of course, we don't know if USC's defense will be improved or whatever. I just think that was an interesting point given how early they played. I think it was like a week 2 game. It was really early before they even finished on conference last year. Cousin Jared, I have to ask you in Oregon State. It feels to me, and I want to see if you agree or disagree with this, if they get mediocre quarterback play, they're going to be good. And if they accidentally get good quarterback play, this is a team that might end up, winning 11 games if they get good quarterback play. Does that seem reasonable to you?
I think looking at this schedule, I think if everything breaks right for them, best case scenario, they can get 2 conference losses. They end up something like 10-2. And I think obviously that would be good enough probably to get them in the conversation for the conference championship game. So yes, I think that's probably what I put their ceiling at is 10 wins. But if they get good quarterback play, you could convince me that they could win 9 or 10 games.
Yeah, and that's, of course, the big question for them. Yeah. Jake, you kind of like threw that underneath there. DJ at Oregon State, I feel like that maybe deserved a few more minutes.
Well, I mean, I can't say his name, so I was trying to avoid pronunciation issues.
I figured out how to say his name last year at the start of the season. I was like, I'm going to figure this out. And then he was so terrible, we didn't talk about Clemson that much, and I didn't have to say his name, and now I've forgotten how to say it again. So hopefully
ukulele.
It's definitely not that. Hopefully, he regains some of the hype form and plays well. We always want to see people succeed, and if he does, this Oregon State team is going to be really fun to watch, and then hopefully we'll all have to learn.
And that ties back to your Clemson point, right? A good running game really helps them, and I think it takes the pressure off of him with Damian Martinez and that offensive line. So I think we might see what we saw early in the year.
Yes, the weight of the world will not be on his shoulders because he will not have to do that at Oregon State because it's a whole different designed offense. Absolutely.
And I'm not saying these are the results that we're going to see, but this does feel to me like both Clemson and DJ are going to benefit from this relationship ending just because it was very abnormal. It was very just almost toxic, I think, for both at that point.
And I have to say, I had the same word came to my mind. And it was not toxic, I don't think that's the right word, but the same word came to my mind. And so I don't know the exact word. I do math, right? English is hard. But yes, it was almost like it wasn't even so much that the relationship was a problem as much as just both sides needed to move on. There was so much hype, so much expectations, so much pressure, anxiety, whatever those type of things were happening. And now he can go and he doesn't have to be the savior. The hero, one of the first guys to get an NIL deal and be on Dr. Pepper commercials, right? He can just go do his thing, a little more quiet life out there in Oregon, and I think he could thrive. And actually, Clemson, just moving on, and that way we don't have to deal with that situation. We can just kind of go out and play.
Yeah, and listen, I'm not saying that these are the results you're going to see, but this feels very Bo Nix to me as far as it just wasn't working in Auburn. Yeah.
It was a very similar comparison where the pressure was so much and he just does better where it's not.
Yeah, absolutely. In the same state, too. That wraps us for the Pac-12. Again, mostly a Pac-12 show, it feels like. Mountain West, San Diego State, who was in the Mountain West, and then they weren't going to be in the Mountain West, and then they were going to be in the Mountain West, and then they weren't going to be in the Mountain West. And I think they are now staying in the Mountain West. But my goodness, if that wasn't confusing, I don't know what was. Because you're going to go under 7 wins. If I'm counting correctly, that looks like it's bold. That's a bold pick for a San Diego State team that tends to feel like they get some wins here and there, right? They've always overperformed, right? It feels a little bold. Tell me why you were expecting a down year from the Aztecs.
Yeah, so first of all, we have to remember that the coach of this team is Brady Hoke, who we have not seen wonderful things from Brady Hoke since the first time that he was at San Diego State. But since then, I have seen nothing that has made me think that Brady Hoke will be an amazing coach that can just automatically get San Diego State to 10 wins. You have to remember, obviously, a lot of the issues with San Diego State stem from their offense. Brady Hoke had Denard Robinson at Michigan. And he was basically just like quarterback sweep right, quarterback sweep left. I know a lot of time has passed since then, but he just does not strike me as the type of guy who's going to take some risk offensively to try to improve his offense greatly. And Maiden, their quarterback, sorry, I can't remember his first name, but his last name's Maiden, Mayden. He came in last season, and what I would say is he solidified the quarterback position for them. But his completion rate was around 50%, a little bit above 50%. And in the nicest possible way, there's probably a reason the guy was playing safety at the beginning of the season and not playing quarterback. And so that's kind of, if anybody is hyped about San Diego State, that's one of the things they're saying is that Maiden came into the beginning season, he stabilized things, he's going to be better his second year as a starting quarterback. But that combination of Brady Hoke and then him, again, playing safety at the beginning of last year, just doesn't really feel like, doesn't leave me have this warm and fuzzy feeling, I would say. That's part of it. The other thing I would say is, let's take a look at this schedule, shall we? Because the beginning of this schedule is something to behold.
But please, let's note, that's a week 0 game, folks. So we have San Diego State, Ohio. That is appointment TV for week 0.
Yeah.
Looking forward to that one. That's I just have to point that out.
Yeah, I'm even with how good San Diego State is usually defensively. I think our boy O'Rourke is probably going to put up some points in that game against San Diego State. So that is definitely one that I'm going to be excited about. But you could convince me that they would, okay, let's say Ohio, it's at home, so San Diego State's probably going to be favored. Actually, while I'm just chit-chatting here, Professor, if you could look at what you had last season, what would you make the line on that one? I'd be interested to know. But Ohio, that kind of feels coin tossy-ish. To me, you've got to win at Ohio State, but then UCLA, Oregon State, Boise State, and going to Air Force. That is about as tough as it can get for a Mountain West team at the beginning of the season. Depending on how the Ohio game goes for them, I think this team could start 1-5, and I would not be surprised. And then you would need them to be perfect on the second half of the season. Now, could they go perfect the second half of the season with that schedule? Absolutely. Hawaii, Nevada, Colorado State, San Jose State, all not good, not putting it nicely. Maybe Utah State's going to be a little more spunky this year. Fresno State, again, probably going to take a step back, but I think they're still going to be a pretty good team. That will be a good game. But I think there's legitimate way that this team could start out 1-5. And then it'd have to be perfect the rest of the season. And I just don't see that happening. I feel like you have a lot of push potential on this one, but much more likely to go under 7 than over that number. So I'm betting $100.
Okay, I would have had San Diego State by about 3.5 last year. San Diego State won 7 games last season. We had an A grade pick on the under in their season finale before the conference championship against Air Force in a game that they lost 13-3. And I just have to point out that we had the under in a game that went 13-3. And that was, I don't remember anything about that game, but I imagine that it was, like watching a masterpiece. Yeah, I'm just imagining Cousin Jerry and I just enjoyed the heck out of watching that performance and having the under. Jake, do you know anything about San Diego State other than their colors and location and mascot?
I know that we are looking forward to basketball season, and they are still going to be very loaded. I know they lost some key pieces, but they're still going to be loaded, still good. But really, I do have this question with San Diego State. Did they just go like, hey, we were good like 10 years ago at everything. Let's just rehire our coaches. Went with Steve Fisher for basketball for a minute, brought back Brady Hoke because they're like, I don't blame them. Like, hey, it worked once, it worked twice. But Ohio, I think, is very sneaky. The east to west thing scares me about picking Ohio there, but your defense has got to be on point because O'Rourke is going to find where you're weak and just pick it apart. Yeah. Then you're asking anybody to go perfect is tough. So asking them to win 6 in a row if they go 1-5. That's going to be very, very tough, even with a down team, because, not that players don't give their best, but you just don't have that extra motivation if you're 4-7 or something like that at the last couple of games. You might be ready to be done if the bowl game's not in sight. I've got stuff to do, been beat up in practice all year. So I don't know. I think under is a really good play. I don't pay that much attention to the Mountain West. I'll let you all do that.
And I do have to point out, of course, I started off, obviously knowing where Cousin Joe was going with this pick. San Diego State, historically been a strong team in the Mountain West, but you talked about their offense being a problem, and I would be remiss if I did not close this discussion on them by just pointing out they played what potentially is the game of their season last year against Toledo in their fourth game of the season, won 17-14. And that feels like their playbook for beating Ohio as well. And that was by far the best game that they played all season long. They had a couple of other decent wins against weaker schools, but they only beat UNLV. And I believe this is when UNLV was having their quarterback issues. They only beat UNLV at home 14-10. They only beat Nevada 23-7, and Nevada was terrible. They only beat Hawaii at home 16-14. They lost against the Air Force at home 13-10. They had some really head-scratching games based off where we assumed that a traditional San Diego State team is. This is a team that's usually 8-9, competing for 10 wins. It seemed like every season. Wasn't what happened last year, because Jared, you don't think it's going to happen again this year. So you're going under 7 wins. Gentlemen, any other Mountain West discussion to be had here? Hawaii's going to be a little bit better, right? They got better at the end of last season. We're expecting better things this year.
Somehow won 3 or 4 games last year. Like however many games they won, it was more than any team with that level of talent should have won.
I feel like by the end of the season they were starting to play really well. They had guys in there who really wanted to play. They were the rare team that was like 2-7 and playing hard because of who was in there in that situation. So I'm expecting better things from Hawaii this year, which is good because they play a lot of late games, of course. And so we always end up, for better or worse, betting on, or against Hawaii. They should be a little bit more competitive. Any other besides Hawaii thoughts on the Mountain West?
I do think Utah State is going to be improved with the second year under the ex-Nevada coach. I think that offense is going to step up where it didn't. But I'm not confident enough to take their win total over. But I do think there will be a better team. And I don't know what to make of Wyoming. They made me so mad last year, so I just wrote them off my list.
Cousin Jared, any Mountain West thoughts?
I think Boise's going to be the best team in the Mountain West, but the beginning of their schedule is really tough. So I'm not sure that you're going to be able to look at them a month into the season and really judge how good they are based on their record. I would be remiss if we didn't go back and talk about Iowa and say that, we really need them to score 25 points per game for the offensive coordinator to keep their job. And so I have full faith that Iowa special teams and defense are going to score like a combined 60 points this year to somehow keep Little Ferentz as the offensive coordinator again.
We did not pull up Iowa's schedule. Whoever the cupcakes are on that schedule, I feel bad for because that it's going to be run up the score, play hard to the end, and see if we can skew the numbers. That was a bizarre story. Absolutely. Yep. I feel like we didn't talk that much about the Mountain West, of course. Apologies to them. But I do feel like both the Big Ten and the Pac-12 just have so many interesting storylines by themselves. We could just talk forever about them. Gentlemen, any parting words? You can see on the screen where we stand heading into part 3, which we will wrap up here shortly. Otherwise, though, any parting words?
Nope. Oh, just going to be a big Miami fan this year.
That head-to-head with Miami will be very interesting. All right, well, that's all.
I'm sure I won't ever hear anything about that the rest of the season.
Yes, we will be updating this every week, absolutely, throughout the season. But thanks here for watching. Make sure that you are subscribed if you aren't already. We will finish up the series soon enough here with part 3 with the Group of 5 conferences, independence. Both of these gentlemen still have $300 left to risk each, so some gems left to go in the small schools, which give some of the most mispriced numbers, so make sure to check that out. But otherwise, as always, best of luck, and remember, you can eat your betting, but please don't bet your eating.